Welcome, everyone, to Protecting People First, How Tesco Built the World's Largest Retail Body-Worn Video Deployment. I'm Kevin McMenamin with Loss Prevention Magazine, and I'd like to thank Reveal and Tesco for having me as your moderator for today's session. This is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about in protecting our frontline workers from the violence and the aggression that's become all too common in all of our stores. Regardless of what vertical you work in, it's a universal issue in our stores. It's a universal issue across our borders. And as you can see from this recent survey, violence and aggression against retail frontline teens is near universal for both the US and the UK markets. The US and the UK markets move together on this type of abuse. And the impact that that has on our teams is very concerning. First and foremost, from a mental health perspective, but also in the impact that it has on retention. As you can also see that as abuse rises, high exposure to abuse attacks leads to a high intent for the retail workers to leave. Now, one retailer who's proactively responded to these challenges is Tesco, who placed people safety at the center of its business case for body-worn video and committed to make body-worn video cameras available to every colleague who wanted one. This session is the story of how that commitment became the world's largest retail body-worn video deployment.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose going back to where we were in sort of COVID times, I mean, it feels like yesterday in some circumstances, doesn't it? In others, it feels like it was a lifetime ago. But we went through COVID, and I suppose from a shrink and security perspective, actually, COVID was quite easy for us in terms of management. And after we got through the initial shock of how we're going to manage people in our stores and work through that, it was relatively good for us in terms of crime reductions and different things like that, which actually played into our favour. What then came as we started to unlock on the back of COVID was a really sharp rise in terms of retail crime and real increases in violence and at a really fast pace. So when we started to unlock from a country perspective, and then obviously how we changed back to a more normal operating model in our stores, we went back very quickly to post-pandemic levels of violence. But then again, 6 months on from there, we started to see huge escalation again at levels that we'd not really seen before. So it was really well documented in the media over here in the UK that the impact this was starting to have. It was there in terms of the stats, which we could see, but then equally colleagues' perception of safety and what they wanted from us really shifted in that time post-COVID. They went from a point during COVID, I think how we handled the situation, how we looked after our colleagues was fantastic, but we had to put a lot of thought and effort into that, as everyone did. Anyone that was open and trading during those times, that was really a pressure which we've probably not seen before. But what we did then see is that really come out of COVID and put pressure on the business again to maintain that under different circumstances, obviously from shift from health concern into a more crime concern. And it was up to us to respond to that. And from a board level through to all of the security team, that was a real challenge for us to start to face into as we really unlocked from there.
What kind of language did you use in having those conversations internally, from the onset? You obviously have to discuss this with leadership. What convinced the CEO that this had to be driven from the very top? Because we see this type of violence and aggression continuing today, right? What were some of the philosophies that you were able to share and approaches that you were able to share with your senior team to get them on board?
Yeah, it was a real shift for us. So I suppose we had previously been in a position of talking mainly about loss of stock and, financial impacts. And where we really had to switch the narrative was to not only crime statistics and impact on stores, but how our colleagues feel and how they feel about working for us. And that was helped from us in terms of there was a backdrop of increasing crime. We could see the numbers, there was a lot that was publicised, but helping our exec understand that actually this is a bigger problem than just what the numbers are telling us. Our colleagues are now telling us they don't feel safe to come to work. They're anticipating leaving and they're worried about incidents happening. We had 1 in 3 of our .com delivery drivers describing that they had been subjected to abuse over the last 6 months since COVID ended, whether that be verbal or physical, and helping them understand that the impact that was having on some areas like retention. I know you mentioned that at the beginning then, Kevin. It was a real change of narrative and something that we had to face into, and taking them on that journey from end to end was a real, like I said, shift in terms of how we'd probably displayed problem statements to them before and not talked about returning elements of finance, but shifted more into let's actually look at what this is going to do for our workforce and how they're going to feel about working for us. And it was just so important to take them on that journey from end to end. So whether it was bringing them into our remote monitoring station and showing them what was going on in the stores, showing them what colleagues were actually facing, as well as then taking that all the way through to as simple things as listening groups, surveys, feedback loops, which we have from our store colleagues regularly, and asking them what they feel was the best solutions that could make them feel safer at work and make them feel more confident. And as soon as we started to really engage them around some of that narrative, they shifted quite quickly into the understanding of what was important here was actually the safety and sentiment of our colleagues, and not so much the financial return of what some of these solutions can bring. When we talk about it from a real basic level, we started to deploy a really what now we would consider a very basic old-fashioned solution in terms of body-worn cameras a long time before we sort of partnered in with Reveal. And when we think about what we learned from that point was that over 60% of colleagues said they felt safer about having a body camera available in their store. And that was a really good sign to us to go, well, actually, just by having a solution available and by Tesco investing in something for colleagues, they were telling us that, yeah, actually, this is what we want, and we feel better about working because we've got something here that we believe can really make us safer. What that then led into was I suppose, as we started to explore and learn further into that area of solution, was actually the one we had probably didn't do everything we wanted to do, and it wasn't actually solving a lot of the problem statements that we had that were wider than that. So we spoke a lot about colleague sentiment and colleague opinion on it, which is important. But what we then found out was that over 90% of time, the cameras were never activated. We also found that usage was a bit of a challenge as well, because the cameras we had were very large. They were difficult to wear. It wasn't very comfortable. The battery life wasn't fantastic. They weren't easy to operate. And we started to then work through some of those more practical solutions to go, yeah, great, we've got a solution here and we've learned the impact that this could have, but we probably haven't unlocked the full potential of this solution and what could we do better with it. And that led us to going back out there in the market and trying to understand what solution was going to fit in best to our strategy in the long term. And when we look about, Ollie spoke about at the beginning there about live incident response, and actually, it's about a real selection of different solutions which fit together, which ultimately can make our colleagues feel safer and also drive crime down in our stores. And we just realised that we had a solution which was doing some of that, but not a lot of it. And it really didn't unlock the full ability of what we could in terms of the future solutions then.
So let's talk a little bit about building the business case for this whole project here. Were there specific evidence points or challenges that made the business case land at a senior level, and what was the sort of the core argument that really cut through with leadership?
Yeah, I think it was, like I said at the beginning, it was a real shift from that financial element and financial return over towards that colleague element. I think as time went on, we did start to then layer up some other sort of KPI areas where we could see the success of it. We spoke about before about retention. We spoke about colleagues' motivation. Absence was another big area for us, that where we were starting to see, as violence opened up in certain areas geographically, absence was starting to spike. We were seeing colleagues that didn't want to be at work as much. As time went on, I think the initial way that we wanted to sort of combat that issue was, like I spoke about earlier, was that bringing our exec and our finance teams on the journey of actually, there isn't going to be as many returning numbers of what you're used to with us pitching for a solution here, but this is about how colleagues feel working for us. But then as time went on, there was these inadvertent effects that actually we did start to be able to layer up and show more, that we could see lower absence rates, for an example, in areas where colleagues had cameras. There was also higher levels of colleague sentiment in terms of their perception of Tesco as a business, by having those solutions in there as well, which again all layers into that retention piece, all layers into sort of that motivation to work and all those different things, which incredibly difficult to quantify some of that stuff as we would in a more traditional sense. But yeah, it did open up some of that area that we could start to talk about, which really helped frame the narrative, especially when we wanted to roll out at scale.
Well, and you did roll out at scale, right? There had to be some sort of CEO commitment there. What did that look like? Because you actually made body-worn camera available to any Tesco associate, colleague that wanted one, right? So what does that say about Tesco's approach to this program?
Yeah, and I think this was the game changer, really, of months of hard work. So from all the team, Ollie heading it up as well for us, just did an awesome job at getting us to a point where we felt as though we'd taken the CEO on a big journey with this, of someone that was relatively new into the business as well. So previous experience wasn't with Tesco before they came into us. And to get him in a position where what we wanted to commit to was that any colleague in Tesco could have access to a body-worn camera if they wanted to. You know, we've seen the impact that that can have through the trials and through some of the previous solutions. And that was at a position where we felt as though we had a solution which was significantly better now than what we'd ever had before. So when he came out as part of our safety campaign and really made that commitment that every colleague was going to have access to a body-worn camera, and it was going to be a fantastic solution that you're all going to be able to wear and activate and use easily, it was just a huge step forward. And when we think about what that then leads to from a colleague perspective, is it really helped bring to life that belief that Tesco's was doing the right thing. And it wasn't going to be easy, right? And we were seeing a lot of incidents in our stores, and things were still getting worse, really challenging in terms of that criminal element. But what it did do is colleagues then shifted to go, actually, it feels like Tesco's are really stepping forward. They do care about me and I'm being listened to. And it is a big statement that we know is going to be a huge investment for us. And we want to step forward and make sure that it's going to be worth it. And that then directed some of that frustration from the backdrop more into that position of going, right, well, now how do we make the best out of our policing relationships? How do we make the best out of our other areas that we can really influence?
So I'm sure there was a pilot process with this. How do you structure something like this in a company the size of Tesco? How did starting small help build that case to scale to the whole organization?
Yeah, no, great question. We started really small early because we knew where like sort of our main problems areas were. We're in our convenient smaller stores where we've seen the most focused in about violence. Obviously, we've reduced the amount of colleagues in there and high level of violence and theft. So partnered with Reveal, we did some really early pilots where we had the tech working in a way that we ground floor level working, and what we did was have really frequent touch points with the ground floor colleagues rather than typically we would go from the leaders or the operational managers or the regional managers on that. We put the colleague at the heart. I think we did. So that's the store colleague we're saying there. And I say that one of the things that was really sort of refreshing from a security provider point of view is that Reveal was down there on the ground floor with us, you know, speaking to these colleagues and really listening to their concerns, i.e. the privacy part and also the wearability piece of that, and really took those pieces away and helped develop a system for us that fit our requirement. We started small, so we went format by format. We started in the convenience, then we went to large, like I said, where we've got hundreds of colleagues that are working for us. Those are our super stores and our extra stores, as we call them. And then later on being the first grocer to go into .com, which is our home grocery delivery drivers, which is a complete different problem statement. Reveal for us were on the journey with us, coming to what we call the shelf edge, to go on the ground floor, talking to those colleagues and really understanding where our pain points were and developing those out.
Mike, you work closely with the team, obviously, you know, through this whole pilot program. Can you share how that partnership worked in practice, and what did you learn about Tesco's day-to-day challenges with the Tesco colleagues in the stores?
And I think generally kind of what we did first was to engage with the project team and understand the problems that they're trying to solve. I think Ash mentioned it's the problem statement. So really, what are we going to be focusing on, and what are those key performance indicators that we need to prove to Tesco as a supplier, as a new supplier, that we can achieve that for them? And, you know, just spending time with them, understanding the very nature of what they're trying to solve, and then taking that to those frontline associates, understanding the day-to-day challenges that those associates are facing to help build that successful project. And one of the things that I'm eternally grateful to Ollie and his team for is that Tesco were very open in terms of previous projects that they'd run, not just in the body-worn video sphere, but across projects that they'd run, to understand where successes had been noted, where failures had been noted, so we could help try and pivot and avoid potential pitfalls and areas. When you're looking at a retailer the size and scale of Tesco, there's going to be obvious areas that you come up against, challenges that you don't see in your average retailer. And by using their experience alongside where we've implemented body-worn video hundreds and thousands of times, it really allowed us to build a very close relationship that we could open and honestly share as much feedback as possible. And really, I love that phrase of getting to the shelf edge of the problem. And once we did that, and one of our colleagues put on a uniform to experience it directly, to understand what wearing the camera was like, standing at that shelf edge, so to speak, brought it back to two things. It was the reduction of violence and aggression, colleagues feeling supported enough to stay. And they're the two main things that we were trying to solve. And, throughout all the discussions, that's what it narrowed down to. And that became our key focus. And everything we built together serves those two.
So there's a number of different areas for us, but I think from a colleague sentiment perspective, it's huge improvements, and we are in a position where we are seeing crime in our stores start to reduce in the last year for the first time since COVID. And, I'm not naive enough to say that's 100% down to Reveal body-worn cameras, but it's a huge part of that. And it really plays into that evidence piece for us. We're starting to see colleagues tell us that they feel more safe from wearing them. We're seeing usage go up, which is always a really positive place to be. And we are seeing increased prosecutions. And interestingly, when we don't submit body-worn camera footage for whatever reason, the first thing the police ask for is, do you have body-worn camera footage? Because they know it secures better prosecutions, better outcomes, and better charges. So huge impacts in terms of what we're doing now moving forward.
I'm sure it sounds like we're banging a drum and a repeated, like a broken record here, but it's that increase in colleague safety. This is directly colleagues writing into us saying, I feel much safer from completing surveys. So it's a 38% increase with these cameras now installed in these stores. And like I say, backing up Ash's talk around obviously supplying the evidence to police, I mean, that's 49% of all shops today have provided evidence. I mean, these cameras upload the footage automatically anyway, but this is when we're talking about that 49% of stores, we're talking about these ones who have supplied specific saved incidents that have gone on to the police to push prosecutions. That's massive when we think about how far we've rolled out. I mean, we're nearly at circa 2,000 collective stores formats. So, I mean, that is a massive amount of evidence that's gone directly to police, straight from these body-worn cameras into our central hub and then back out into law enforcement, making it so much easier. I mean, like I say, we have letters, don't we, Ash, directly from police forces that credit how easy it is to work with Tesco, that we provide this evidence straight through them rather than having to physically go to stores and do USB sticks and all this sort of stuff. This goes directly to them.
Brilliant. Let me ask you both a bit of a sharp question here, because this is a lessons learned type of deployment here, right? If you had to look back and do it again, right? Hindsight's always 2020, right? So if you look back, what would you do again, and what would you not do going forward as advice maybe to folks who are thinking about going on this journey?
So I think that what I would definitely do again is the stakeholder engagement at all levels. So I think that was the key to making this work, from the colleagues all the way through to the exec, the board, making sure that everyone's engaged as understanding why and what impact this is going to have. I would 100% say that was the biggest success of how we got this over the line. And I think in terms of lessons learned, what we could do better, I think it's probably, when we look at where we are now, there's a few elements we've had to add in as we've gone. So when I look at things like usage detail, that took us a little bit of time to get that over the line. So how we could accurately see what stores were using what cameras at what times really helped us when we started to see visibility of that. So that was something that I would try and go live with right at the beginning, because then my field team or my remote teams can then go in and support there, because it could identify a training need quicker right at the beginning if there's something there, and equally highlight a fact that is there something else going on there that we need to be more aware of. So that usage detail is really important, especially at this sort of scale, because you can't be everywhere all the time, right? So you've got to go and direct the resource where it's needed. And I think the other bit for me that we've got a much better job of doing as time's gone on, but we would do a better job at the beginning, is really highlighting the successes. So I think for me, we're in a great place now of being able to talk about individual impacts of using the solution. Whereas as time had gone on, I think we were right at the beginning, it was all deployment, it was all let's go as quick as we can, colleagues are feeling great, this is what they want. Actually, when we think about not only having the solutions in store but driving usage, to tell them about this is the effect of wearing it, and here's some live examples where potentially we wouldn't have had a prosecution if it wasn't for somebody activating their Reveal camera. That is a way of really highlighting to colleagues how important some of this stuff is by sharing those success stories. And I would definitely do more of that if we had our time again from the beginning.
I mirror what Ash say in terms of what we would do differently in terms of get that usage data and our dashboards that we've created that drive sort of those conversations up much earlier. I'd also sort of say what I would do differently is get more of that learning material and that stuff developed much earlier on. But certainly what I would do again, the Tesco way of that we went non-mandatory, that it was voluntary, that people could use this, and also that we, perceivingly at the beginning, oversubscribed cameras, because it really did eke out those edge user cases. We found that Our pharmacy colleagues wanted to use them. We found that our maintenance colleagues wanted to use them. And like I mentioned earlier, our stock counter colleagues wanted to use them. So like by having that availability and that openness and saying and going larger early, certainly helped us, and we certainly learned a lot of lessons from that. And I'd absolutely do that again. Like I say, that sentiment from the top-down approach of having our leadership bought in early on and really, helping drive that investment so we can really make a difference for colleagues at the ground floor.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Ollie, you've while I've still got you, you've described Body One Video. It's kind of more of like almost like a live in the moment type tool rather than a retrospective one. Can you just tell us what you're working on now? Where do you see the future of this program going?
Yeah, you unlocked my really passionate point. So where I see the sort of future of body worn camera, I think a lot of the retailers and other areas that use body worn camera see it as a more retrospective evidence tool. What I certainly see it as is potentially a live in the moment tool. And what I'm certainly doing with Tesco at the moment is developing this out with Reveal to enact. There is a panic or SOS button that's on the side of here. So I have a select amount of stores where I'm currently trialing this and piloting this, where we're connected these live up to, you'll see in the top right hand corner there, our special little SOC team. And what we've got at the minute is these cameras are linked back to that SOC team 24 hours a day. And if a colleague feels even slightly uneasy about something, this is the culture we're trying to change now. If they feel slightly uneasy, even if someone walks into the store and they go, I don't quite like the look of that individual, they can press that duress button. It goes into the SOC and the SOC then remote in and can live monitor both audio and visual, then also call in and speak to the colleague two-way. And I think this is a game changer because I said our colleagues are telling us they feel so much more supported here because the SOC are able then to pull police response out. They're able to dispatch one of Ash's field team to go in and help them and support them post an incident or during an incident. We've got a tactical guardian third-party team that are able to be dispatched, which is like our own private little police force that they can come off the back of this. But I think this is the future. We are like actively seeking now within this year to roll out to another 100 stores because I think this is going to be a huge success. And I think this is the future for us at Tesco is really supporting colleagues live in the moment rather than afterwards, rather than pushing prosecutions. Though those things are important, I don't want to take that away. I really think the future in this is giving them a safety tool where they can feel safe right now, right this second.
So I think from our side, it's wherever you are on the journey, the deployment's getting the most out of this. Like I've just said, do two things. Covering everyone and keeping that utilization high and closing the loop with feedback to colleagues. The coverage helps detect and protect, and the feedback builds that kind of support mechanism. And that's what lifts morale and keeps people within your business, keeps those people that you want to keep there. So the Tesco story isn't simply just about deploying cameras at scale. I like Ollie's analogy of pulling a pin on a grenade and chucking it in. It's about building a safety program that colleagues trust, that stores can use and that businesses can stand behind. Every kind of conversation is around how do we make sure that we can stand behind this decision.